The speaking delegate, we have Dr. Jamel Rizwana Hussein Din, who will be talking particularly about the management of non-strabismic binocular vision dysfunction. Before she begins, I would like to give her a general introduction. Dr. Rizwana has accomplished an MPhil and PhD. She is also the Fellow of American Academy of Optometry and the College of Optometrists in Vision Development as well. She is associated with Elite School of Optometry as an assistant professor and to Sankara Netralaya as the head of Department of Binocular Vision or Vision Therapy Clinic. She is the diplomat of American Academy of Optometry and also the president of American Academy of Optometry India chapter. I welcome you, Dr. Rizwana, on behalf of Mirwai Foundation and all our participants. It's our honor to have you.
Thank you so much, Solu, for that introduction. So may I start the presentation for today?
Yeah, ma'am, sure.
Okay, so first of all, I welcome everyone who is present today here with us, especially at this time, like 7:45 in India and 8 o'clock in Nepal. So guess all of you are able to share my, see my screen. And so because we are doing this presentation through Zoom, getting live on YouTube, you guys can just keep putting your comments or doubts in the YouTube chat section, which we will get back later. But even otherwise, I would prefer to keep interacting with the audience throughout my presentation. So the audience who are here with us today, I have a request for all of you. You have to parallelly open another screen, which is more for voting. So I'll just in a couple of minutes explain to you how we are going to do that. Okay. So with that note, I'm so happy to be here, first of all, speaking to all of you on management of non-strabismic binocular vision anomalies for today. And I do not have any disclosures to reveal. So as you would see here, the objectives of today's presentation are basically, the first objective is to understand the basic framework to management at the primary eye care level, because I know that many of you might just be starting a binocular vision practice. So I have put my contents in such a way that you are able to understand, okay, if I have to take the very first step, what should I do? And then I'm also going to quickly speak about, do we really need binocular vision care? And what is the overview of management? How do we really approach a patient who has a binocular vision problem through some case scenarios connected to evidence-based practice? And the prerequisite for today, which is all of you who are here today must have some basic understanding on clinical tests, performing clinical tests in binocular vision. And also you should have the clinical skill set to be able to diagnose based on a standard clinical criteria. Suppose if you have problems in this, don't worry. We have some basic videos for these, aspects, even in the YouTube channel. So you can go and watch it after you finish doing this session. So these two are the basic references that I will be using throughout my talk. The first is, Mitchell Scheiman's Clinical Management of Binocular Vision, the textbook that we use to teach binocular vision. The next is the Clinical Practice Guidelines released by the American Optometric Association on care of the patient with accommodative and Vergennes dysfunction. So this one that is shown to in the right side is basically, you can freely download this from Google. So this really gives you a very good overview about how to and a lot of other things based on expert opinion and consensus. Okay, so this is really a very, very good reference that I would suggest. So now we are going to start with our first poll. So what I really want you all to do is to go and open menti.com. So you see here, right? menti.com. Go to menti.com and then enter this code. Okay, so just open menti.com and enter this code, which is 344446. So basically 3 4 4s and 6. Okay, so I want you to go and enter this. So parallelly open another screen, type menti.com, and enter this number in that box and then say submit. Okay. So once you do that, you will see a screen and I will tell you what to do. So just quickly, let's just quickly do that before we go ahead and finish the session. Start the session. Okay, so I'm going to, okay, looks like so just choose the option that defines your current status. Like if you are an undergrad student, click that. If you are a postgrad student, click the appropriate option. So basically, you need to be, okay, good. I just want to understand the demographics of the audience who are with us today. That's why I'm just going ahead with this kind of a polling. So this poll will run for another 10 seconds and it will stop because I have to, know who I'm speaking with. Okay, so looks like we have a major percentage of undergrad students with us today. And then we have followed by optometrists, and we also have some masters in optometry students. Okay, great. Oh, look at that. How interesting. I think looks like people are joining in and then they're just typing in. Okay, so I've got a fairer understanding of the audience. Just stay on that screen and we're going to go with our next question. Okay, so we'll be just shuffling between. Okay, good. So I'll be shuffling between these two screens basically. Okay. Okay, so the next poll, which will be on your screen right now, okay, is this. So just put a number between 1 to 10. So you know that today's topic is management of non-strabismic binocular vision anomalies, right? So whatever you feel, whatever number that you feel is relevant to you. 10 means I'm like super confident with everything. 1 means I'm really least confident. So whichever number that you feel with respect to your confidence. So this is completely anonymous. As you see, we will not know who's answering what, but just go ahead and click the number that represents your confidence level for today. Okay. Today at this moment. So how much ever confidence that you've got. Okay. So we've got like, see, numbers spread all over. Okay. Okay. So it looks like the average confidence for people today is somewhere at 6.4. Okay. That's cool. Okay. So what we are going to do now, people keep answering. Okay. So just type in what you expect to learn from today's webinar. Okay. What you expect to learn from today's webinar. Just type in just one word or two word. Okay. I don't need long sentences. Just type in one word or two words. What do you expect to learn from today? Okay. This is how we will be doing the whole session. So I will be presenting. I will be asking questions. Okay, cool. BV exercises. So as you type in information, okay, strabismus, okay. So when I get to know your expectations, I'm going to right away tell you whether I will be managing or I will be meeting with your expectations or I may not. Okay, so how to manage NSBVA, okay, strabismus, BV exercises, treatment modality, information. Just type in whatever you expect from today's webinar. Management at a retail shop, okay. Much of learning, okay, good to learn. So you have an open mind case discussion. Yes, we're going to do that. Yeah, we're going to talk about clinical practice. All BSV, okay. Okay, great. So look at that. So, wow. To refresh once again, cool. Okay, so I'm so happy to look at the way that you guys are interacting today. So this is how we will be doing all the sessions. Okay, so I may not talk about, so I will not talk about strabismus. I will talk about intermittent strabismus a little bit, but not like too much with strabismus. Okay. Okay. Good. Now I've got a fairer understanding of what your expectations are and why you're here. Okay. So happy to know that. And what I'm going to do now is to get back to our presentation. So okay, so we will be definitely kind of shuffling between the screens. Okay. Okay. So we finished the polls. Okay, so this is something that I always use before I really start every of my presentations. This is just the conceptual model of how we handle binocular vision. So as you know, the base of this pyramid is basically your comprehensive eye examination. On top of it is your binocular vision assessment, okay, which we also call visual efficiency. And very important, a very important aspect to comprehensive assessment is to do a proper refraction. Okay, so today we're going to be focusing at, okay, now that I have done a perfect eye examination, a comprehensive assessment of the eye and visual system, and then I've also done a BV testing, and I'm having these details with me now. So what do I do at this point? That's what we're going to do today. We're not going to talk about how we do binocular vision assessment today, but as I told you, we definitely have information available in the YouTube channel for you to go and look at if you need more information on that, on the basic assessment part of binocular vision. Okay, so once you do binocular vision, it is very important to know what are the expected normative values that you should use to refer. Okay, so this is some of the basic parameters that I have mentioned here and what is expected. So for example, if you do a Fourier testing, then up to 4 exophoria at near, 4 basin at near is normal, 2 basin at distance is normal, and any amount of esophoria is generally considered abnormal. And then near point of convergence, what's the normal ranges with accommodative target. And there's another test called Penlight. With Penlight and red green filter, you can do near points of convergence, and the normal values are given here. The near point of accommodation, what is the formula that you should use to calculate the near points of accommodation? This is the formula that is more representative of the Indian population. And then the normal accommodation lag that you can find using your dynamic retinoscopy. The technique that we use is called the monocular estimation method, and this is accommodative facility testing. If some of you feel very kind of, oh, I have so much doubts in even in doing the procedures, as I told, please go back and look at those previous videos. Okay, so let's just see how do we really go ahead in managing all our cases. Okay, the first important thing is to get the symptoms right, like to ask a detailed history to the patient to understand the etiology, because see, it's okay, it's easy to diagnose the condition, but it's very important to know what has caused the condition. Okay, so that is very important, because some of the binocular vision problems, we are going to see one today, can have some even a brain pathology underlying the problem, a neurological issue underlying the problem, or some other acute issues. Okay, like a recent viral infection or a head injury or something underlying the problem. So it is important to understand what caused the problem for you to decide about whether I should treat or I should wait, or I should co-manage this patient with some other specialist. Okay, so it's very important to get that right. And then, as I told you again and again, it's important to get the refraction right. Then do your binocular vision testing, and if required, do your cyclorefraction. Okay, and always it's important to make sure that the patient's accommodation amplitudes are normal before diagnosing any convergence issues, because many times they coexist and we kind of misdiagnose. Okay, so it's very important to first make sure that the accommodation amplitudes are normal. And I would recommend that you go and read this particular paper, because in this paper we discuss about what are the minimum tests that you need to do to diagnose binocular vision problems. The reason why I am mentioning about this test is because given the current situation, COVID-19, we may not be able to spend a lot of time with our patients. We want to quickly see the patients. So if you go and see this paper, then you will get a good understanding about what are the minimum tests that you need to conduct to diagnose the problem. So, okay, now we've come to the point where the question is, do we really need binocular vision care? Okay, so do we need binocular vision care? So this is the study that we did, okay, in Chennai, where we found that the prevalence of non-strabismic problems is about 30.8%. Okay, 30.8%, almost. What does this mean? If you see 10 patients, you will have almost 3 to 4 patients who have some binocular vision problem. Okay, that's what it means. You see 100 patients, almost 30 to 31 of these patients, especially this study was done among children. So if you are going to examine children between 7 and 17 years, then a higher percentage of them are going to have some kind of a binocular vision problem. And especially the two top ones in the list are convergence insufficiency, that contributes to about 16%, and accommodative infacility, that contributes to about 10.8%. So it's very important for you to know how to diagnose these issues. Okay. And so today I also looked at what is the situation in Nepal. Okay, so this was a study that's been published in 2018. So this is a study from basically the BP Koirala Lyme Center. Okay, and so what they found was, again, look at this point here. I have put convergence insufficiency was found in almost 61.2% of the study population. So basically, in this study, they examined subjects, like examined clinical microscopists, especially these are people who work on the microscope all the time. And because all the time they're accommodating constantly and they're looking through these microscopes, people wanted to understand, okay, how is their accommodation and convergence status? And look at this, the refractive error prevalence was 70%, okay, huge. Convergence insufficiency 61%, and accommodative insufficiency and infacility is 41% and 40%. Okay, so definitely this is like a huge number. So what I'm trying to tell you through this is that as optometrists, you have really a lot of scope, definitely, to diagnose binocular vision and to treat binocular vision. I'll show you one another study. Okay, I'm so proud to tell you that this person here, Fatima Nesta, was my student. Okay, so she did fellowship with me like almost 7-8 years back. So she worked again with Dr. Gauri Shankar Shrestha, and then this study came from the BP Koirala again. And in this study, they looked at visual problems among video display terminal. Understand what is this? This is nothing but computers or any kind of digital device now. Okay, so they looked at people who use computers, and what they found was almost accommodative infacility is very, very common. Okay, in 92% of the subjects, they found some problem or the other. Okay, so go and look at these papers to see, like, how common accommodation and convergence issues are. And another important study that I want to share with you that we published very recently is the frequency of undetected binocular vision anomalies among ophthalmology trainees. Okay, now that we spoke about general public, we spoke about school children, these are people who are eye specialists. And then we found that, okay, how many of eye specialists have issues like even optometrists can join this, the results of the study can even be extrapolated to optometrists, because we have common visual demands in terms of using slit lamp, in terms of doing your retinoscope, or doing a direct ophthalmoscope. And ophthalmologists have a lot of versions demand, especially when they use the indirect ophthalmoscope. So we wanted to look at how much binocular vision problems are present in these people, especially who are attending a surgical training program. And what we found, almost 55% of them had some issue or the other. And the most common issue was convergence insufficiency and accommodative infacility. So time and again, what is really coming out is that be it school children, be it computer users, be it ophthalmologists, eye care professionals, all of us, none of us are exempt from this binocular vision problem. That's the message. Okay. And now that we are in a very, very different situation, which is post-COVID-19, we really don't know what's coming up. Are we going to see more patients with myopia, more digital eye strain, more accommodation issues? We don't know. But be prepared, guys. Be prepared with the required skill set to be able to handle these problems, because this is in fact an opportunity for all of you to really, diagnose and provide appropriate care to these people who need it. Okay. Okay, so moving to the specific topic for today, which is management of non-strabismic binocular vision problem. Now that we understood, yes, BV problem is really, really huge. Now, how do I this? Okay, so this is the framework that I took from the guidelines document that I showed you, the American Optometric Association's guidelines. Okay, so you can use this as a reference. So first of all, if you know that a patient has convergence insufficiency, then the first treatment that you should be offering is vision therapy, and then you can look at prisms. Likewise, if you know what problem you are dealing with, then this framework gives you what is the first step that you need to take. Okay, so the first is primary treatment approach, and the second thing is secondary treatment options. Okay, so so that's what this framework gives you. So you can use this as a reference to decide or to take a decision about what should I do for this patient. So today we're going to see two cases through which we're going to discuss this. Okay. Okay, so get back to your menti.com, the same tab. So keep it always open. Okay, so I'm going to show you the fourth poll for today. Okay, so remember this code and just keep that screen open. Okay, don't get away from that screen. Okay, so just come inside and then your question will be projected onto the screen. So for those of you who are joining in recently, you have to go to this website that you see, menti.com, and then press this code. Okay, 333444446. Okay, so just look at your phone or the screen wherever you have opened this. Just press whatever you think is your right choice. Okay, which is what would you do to manage convergence insufficiency. Okay, there's no right or wrong answer. It's completely up to you to choose the option. Just go ahead and choose. Okay. Are you all with me? Have you gone to menti.com? Okay, so the poll is going to end and we're going to see the results shortly. Let's just see how many of you have answered what. Okay. Okay. So there's no right or wrong answer. See here, like everything is right. Okay. So what is your current standard? So many of you give pencil push-ups, some of you give home vision therapy, and some of you give in-office vision therapy. That is great. So I just want to understand how your treatment options are. Okay. Okay, that's good. And now all of us know how things are being managed, right? Okay. So I'm going to stop the share and then go back to my presentation. So this is how I will be. Okay, cool. So now that I have known what is your, standard clinical care, we're just going to move to today's first case. This is a 25-year-old male who is accountant by profession, and he says that I'm having eye strain and words moving around the page. So all eye tests apparently normal, okay, coming out normal visual acuity and refraction. And so we do the preliminary assessment, and so his visual acuity is 6/6, no significant correction required. And this is what you see. You see orthophoria at distance, you see a large exophoria at near. His accommodative amplitudes, near points of accommodation, are normal for his age. And NPC with accommodative target is almost 25 centimeters, so he's not able to converge. And you also see that his near positive fusional vergence amplitudes, which is convergence amplitudes. Okay, so you use base out prisms and you test for convergence amplitudes, and he reports that that he sees blur at 8 prisms and break at 10 prisms, and then he is able to see, like, you know, he's recovering back to single vision at 8 prisms. So this is the convergence amplitudes. Okay, and then we go ahead and then understand this case. And what we find is that, of course, as we discussed, receded near point of convergence, large near exophoria, and reduced positive fusional vergence at near. So we know that we are dealing with the problem of convergence insufficiency. Okay, so now just go back to your menti.com once again, and I'm going to ask you another question. Okay. Regarding this patient, okay, regarding this patient, just answer, okay, whatever that you know, just answer. I have some options given for this patient. So as you know that we saw about the case of receded near point of convergence, large near exophoria, and I also showed you that the near positive fusional vergence amplitudes are 8 prisms blur, 10 prisms break, and 8 prisms recovery. Okay, so what you think, okay, is correct among these options? Okay, so if you are not able to come to a conclusion, don't worry, whatever you think is right, just press that and then we will discuss. Okay, so we will soon discuss, don't worry. Okay, so we just have one more second to go, and let's just see how. Okay, so some of you feel that Sheard's criteria is not met. That's the correct answer, basically. Of course, we did discuss that this is a very typical case of convergence insufficiency, because NPC is receded and then patient has large exophoria at near. This is definitely convergence insufficiency. So we will discuss about vision therapy very soon. Okay, so we'll now talk about what is this whole Sheard's criteria we are talking about. Okay, so I just did a presentation last week for Assam Optometry Association, and you can go back to that presentation, which will be available in YouTube shortly. So what I want you to do what I want you to, listen to that presentation about in detail. Okay, so okay, so we're just going to talk about Sheard's criteria now. Okay, so what is basically Sheard's criteria is, it's nothing but the relationship between the demand and the reserve. So what is the demand? What is the reserve? Okay, the demand is basically the exophoria status of the patient. So I just told you, okay, I showed you that this patient has got 8 prisms exophoria. So this is the demand. Okay, so if somebody has got a phoria, a specific amount of phoria, how much reserve do I have? Okay, how much capacity do I have to control this phoria? Okay, so that is what is the fusional vergence amplitude. So if I have 8 prisms exophoria, do I have good convergence to manage this 8 prisms exophoria? Okay, so Sheard says that if somebody has got a certain amount of phoria, the fusional vergence reserve, okay, which is the blur point, should be at least twice that of this near phoria. Okay, so if you have 8 exophoria, then the blur point should be at least 16 prisms. Okay, so suppose if you do not see blur, then you can look at the break. But in this case, look at these prism diopters. Okay, so what is the amount of convergence amplitudes? If you really see that patient has very low fusional vergence amplitudes, okay, positive fusional vergence amplitudes. It's not 2 times, the phoria status. So why is this important? So if somebody has convergence amplitudes twice or more than that of the phoria status, then they can remain symptom free. Okay, so most likely this is likely to determine the patient's symptoms. Okay, that is very important. So somebody who does not have adequate convergence amplitudes, which is 2 times that of the phoria, are more likely to end up with symptoms. Okay, that is what is Sheard's criteria. So Sheard postulated that fusional reserve, which is the fusional vergence amplitudes, should be at least twice the phoria. Okay, so that's what we discussed. The positive fusional reserve blur point should be at least twice the amount of the exophoria. And if we are talking about divergence, okay, in esophoria, then the negative fusional vergence reserve should be at least twice the amount. Okay, this is very, very important. So whenever you measure a patient's phoria, also measure the appropriate convergence amplitudes. Okay, so if somebody has exo, then measure the positive fusional vergence amplitudes and see if they have got at least twice that of the phoria status. This is point number 1. Point number 2, coming to the question, the survey that I took with all of you, which is, what is the preferred clinical practice patterns in convergence insufficiency? What do clinicians prefer to do? So this was a survey that was done in 2008. Okay, so almost 14 years back. And so what does this survey talk about? This survey talks about what do people prefer to do? What do eye care practitioners prefer to do? Almost pencil push-ups therapy is something that 79% of ophthalmologists recommended for convergence insufficiency. Okay, I don't know how much of this pattern has changed recently, but what do I want to convey to you, which is the evidence-based practice to convergence insufficiency. So what is the best practice pattern based on the evidence that we have now? Which is this study, which is a randomized clinical trial of treatments for symptomatic convergence insufficiency in children. Okay, so what does this study tell you about? Is that these things. Okay, first, they had done about 6 randomized controlled trials, randomized clinical trials. First thing, Bayesian prisms or Bayesian prism glasses is no more effective. Okay, than placebo reading glasses in improving clinical signs or symptoms in children. Okay, so in children, prism glasses may not work, okay, or does not work better than even plain placebo reading glasses. These are nothing but glasses that did not have any prisms. What really works is vision therapy and orthoptics is more effective, and especially in-office vision therapy, which is vision therapy done in the clinics, is more effective than home-based convergence exercises in improving clinical signs and symptoms in children. And in adult population, there's not much of evidence, but today let's focus on at least whatever evidence that we have at this moment. Okay, so at this moment, what we know is that vision therapy is definitely is one of the effective treatment options for convergence insufficiency. And this study also came out with the fact that pencil push-up exercises is as equivalent to placebo, which is like, it's not as effective, or it's least effective compared to other treatment strategies. Okay, so that's very important for us to know that what really gives the patient the best benefit when it comes to vision therapy options. Okay, so that's what this study found out. And so the convergence insufficiency treatment trial says that what they did is, in the clinic, they gave about 1 hour of vision therapy, okay, once a week, and then the rest of the days patient will do home-based exercises. And in that home-based exercises, they had pencil push-ups, they had computer-based vision therapy programs for 15 minutes. So one day they will come to the clinic, do 60 minutes of in-office vision therapy, and then rest of the days they will do home therapy. And so this went for 12 to 24 weeks. Okay, so 12 to 24 weeks means almost 12 to 24. So every week once they would come to the clinic to take the vision therapy. And what protocol they followed? Some of you asked, I want to know about the management. So go and read this paper. This paper produces provides you step-by-step information about what kind of vision therapy strategies you need to use. So in the phase 1, you need to train the gross convergence of the patient. In the phase 2, you need to go ahead and train what we call the step versions of the patient, and then do monocular accommodative therapy. And in phase 3, we need to do jump versions training. So it's not that you just do everything at the same time. Okay. So it's very important that you go phase wise. Okay. So you just do gross convergence training. I'll show you some examples how we do that. And then in the phase 2, you do step versions. In phase 3, you do jump versions. So you can go read this paper. It's very simple to understand. You will know what are the vision therapy techniques, even simple techniques that you can use to train your patient when they have convergence insufficiency. And
excuse me, ma'am.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, can you please zoom up of your screen or increase your screen size?
Zoom the screen size?
Yes, ma'am. Now it's good.
It's better?
It's better, ma'am.
Okay, okay, okay.
But another option will be good, ma'am. If I see it, another option will be good. If you only press the F1 button, and it will, I guess, it will be directly come up with the full of the screen on your screen.
Okay, I'll just try to. Is it okay now?
Yes, it's perfect, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Kapil. Okay, so we did some. Okay, so what we did is we did gross convergence training. As you see here, these are called lifesaver cards, and these are called barrel cards. Okay, so we did, as you see here, the patient is doing these lifesaver card exercises for convergence, and then she's also doing these barrel card exercises. And we also added some computer orthoptics program using random dot stereograms to train the patient's convergence amplitudes. Okay, so this is what we did. We did 10 sessions of in-office therapy. So in our practice, what we do is that we do like 45 minutes of training every day for 10 consecutive days, because as you know, in our setup, patients come from outstation, so we can't ask them to come once a week. But if you have local patients, then it's important that you can give home reinforcement, like home therapy and in-office therapy. You can mix it depending on how it works for your patient. Okay, so we did 10 sessions of in-office vision therapy. And what I want to tell you is some of the important things when you do vision therapy. Okay, always work on accommodation skills also, and then you train version skills. And it's important to look at, if there is an imbalance between the eyes, like even a difference in accommodative facility or whatever, it's important to balance that, because when you balance that, binocular coordination becomes better. And when you want to train fusional vergence, then there are 3 grades of fusion, right? You have your simultaneous macular perception, then you have flat fusion, and then you have stereopsis. So you have targets for each of these different aspects of fusion. So you actually, when you train, you move from stereopsis to flat fusion, because it's very difficult for patient to do a flat fusion before they really start their stereopsis training. So if you have seen a computer orthoptics program, then you will know that there are different targets, and even if you have a synaptophore for that matter, the synaptophore has got different targets for each of these. So you can use a stereo based targets and then come back. Okay, that is the order of training that is recommended by many. And it's also important to use large targets. Okay, so remember, like CAT cards or large circles to train gross convergence first. Don't give really small targets, okay, because when you give small targets, then the patient needs to even have good accommodation control. So use large targets, peripheral stimulation, then move to small targets. And always introduce jump vergence, like prisms, base out basin, base out basin. So you can do jump vergence technique towards the end. And if you are dealing with younger patients and children, what you can actually do is you can even add a lot of balance training, like so this is a different topic altogether, but just know that you can integrate other sensory systems. Okay, like putting them on a balance board and then doing the heart chart sort of activities. Okay, so you can also do that. So this is again from the references down below. So these are some of the basic concepts of how you do vision therapy sequencing. Okay, so what happened to our patient is that after vision therapy, look at the improvements that happened. Patient improved in all aspects of convergence amplitudes and even accommodation. Okay, so this is how vision therapy is shown to be very, very successful. Now, some of you might ask, can I give prisms for this patient? The question is, currently we do not have an understanding about what happens long term with prisms, because many times when we put prisms, patients become dependent on prisms. Okay. And that is the reason why we are talking about efficacious options, okay, like vision therapy that can, in a short period, it can really give greater improvements in both symptoms, relieve the patients from all the headache and eye strain, and also improve the binocular vision parameters. So it's very important that which is what kind of treatment is important. And of course, patients were super happy. Okay, so now go back to your mentee. Okay, and I'm going to take the next poll, and I'm assuming that because we are like, okay, so just open the same code, okay, menti.com, and then type 34446. Okay. Now that I did tell you, okay, I did talk to you about bring the patient to the clinic and then give vision therapy. So now considering the current situation, like the post-COVID situation, do you feel that in-office vision therapy is going to be challenging? What is your feeling? Like, do you think that bringing the patient to the clinic, bringing the patient, asking the patient to travel, is this going to be challenging? What is your feel? Okay, I want to understand your mindset about the current situation. Okay, let's just see. Okay, see, look at that. So most of you feel that it's going to be challenging. Some of you feel maybe. Some of you feel like, very few of you feel that no. Okay. Okay. So this is really good to know that yes, you have a sense of the current situation, because it's very important to prepare yourself to face the current situations always. Okay. Okay. So why did I ask this question is because I don't know, I feel it is definitely challenging. Okay, because we've been having of course, you know that at Shankar Nethralaya we have this well equipped vision therapy clinic that sees about 15 to 20 patients a day, and sometimes we even get to see about 25 to 30 patients a day. And now post COVID, I can tell you that patients are so scared to come to the clinic. Okay, nobody really wants to come. Okay, because life is more important to people than coming over and taking treatment for some of the conditions that they think is not like so important. Okay, so but as I told you in the first, post COVID-19 is a time when people are all glued to computers, increased number of working hours, increased number of gadget use. So definitely these problems are also going to be on the rise. So this is a recent edition from Vision Development and Rehabilitation Journal, the journal from the COVD. So you can go, this is a freely accessible journal. This current issue has come out with such a nice theme, which is television therapy. Okay, there's an option called television therapy, and there are a lot of articles on how you can incorporate television therapy in your practice. So don't really miss reading these nice articles that's come out, which talks about how you can start television therapy in your practice. So what do we do at Nethralaya is that this is, of course, the pilot model that we've proposed. So we start sending out email communications to patients. We do symptom survey administration. We meet the patient one-on-one through, Google Meet link that we set for the patient. So this is the current trial that we are doing. Okay, so we might improve upon this telehealth vision therapy model. And then we also send anaglyphs and accommodation flippers that can be couriered to the patient. After that, we use the Binoc software to run the telehealth binocular vision assessment. So you can share the screen, like now how we are connected through, technology, like through Zoom and YouTube. So you can use some of the, softwares, telehealth, just like virtual softwares like Zoom and Google Meets and things like that, and connect with the patient and share the screen and then run the vision therapy, soft vision therapy test. Okay, and you can share it from your end. Patient can do it at home and you can really see their performance. After that, you can prescribe home vision therapy. this is, I would say, such a brilliant model. This is one example of how through Zoom, the screen is being shared and patient is getting examined. And we've also written up a paper on this, which will come soon, about the efficacy or how these models can be utilized for binocular vision treatments like convergence insufficiency and amblyopia and things like that. Okay, so that is the message that I want to drive at this point. So it's not that you have to stick on to conventional treatment options. Think outside the box. Look at how you can help your patient, through telehealth vision therapy models. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move to the next case. Okay, so you can just open up your, I know that I'm making you shuffle between two screens, but it's very important that you are engaged in this whole process. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question now. Okay, so just go ahead and answer this question. This is the next case that we are going to discuss. And this is a 25-year-old male who has presented with complaints of binocular diplopia at distance. Okay, and these are the cover test findings. Patient has got a large ESO for distance, about 16 prisms. Okay, ESO deviation. And for near, this patient has got about 10 prisms of ESO deviation. Okay, the eyes are converged inside like that. Okay, and what is the tentative diagnosis? Okay, for distance, patient has got large ESO more than near. So whatever you think is the correct diagnosis for this case, which we are going to talk about next. Okay, over the next 5 to 10 minutes, we are going to discuss about how we are going to manage these patients. Okay, so we saw one exo case, which is a convergence insufficiency. Now we are going to see one ESO deviation case. Okay, and look at how we are managing this. And it's going to end 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3, 2, 1. Let's see how you've been able to diagnose. Okay. Okay, so I've got a good deal of options here. So as you see on my screen, I mean, I'm having a tough time just handling the Zoom button. Okay, anyways, doesn't matter. Okay, so if you see the screen here, divergence insufficiency is apparently the right answer. So I will tell you, so as I told you before, just go back and then look at, the diagnostic options. Because when somebody has got a large ESO at distance, okay, what does that mean? Patient is not able to diverge. Okay, so because patient is not able to diverge, the eyes have come inside. So any increased ESO deviation at distance compared to near is suggestive of divergence insufficiency. Okay, so I know you can get confused with convergence excess, but convergence excess is when the near ESO is more, because convergence is a function at near, divergence is a function at distance. Okay, so go back and look at these diagnostic criteria. Okay, but really a good attempt, and I really appreciate all of you for this. And so I'm going to now go back to this presentation. Okay, so good. Thanks for answering that. And this is a case that we published. So the good news is you can go back and then type this, and you can download the PDF. This is a case that we published a few years back. This is the case that I just presented in the poll. So this patient was a 25-year-old male who basically came with sudden onset of binocular horizontal diplopia. Okay, so patient had horizontal uncrossed diplopia, and he just said that it's just very acute. Okay, just last 1 week he's noticed this diplopia, and he also had some eye pain. He had some complaints of vomiting, some radiating headaches, and he said he just couldn't do any sort of computer work or anything, and there was no significant systemic illness. Okay, and there was no head injury or anything. And because this is a sort of sudden onset of ESO deviation, patient was diagnosed to have acute abducens nerve paralysis, like sixth nerve palsy. And the local ophthalmologist had given this patient a 10-day course of intravenous methylprednisolone injection. Okay, and brain scan was done, and everything is really normal for this patient. So this is the okay, so this is what you will, this is the baseline visit. So patient had normal visual acuity, and of course because patient had uncrossed diplopia, okay, with Wuerth dot, and look at the deviation. In the first visit, patient had about 30 prisms of ESO deviation at distance and 20 prisms of ESO deviation at near, and then he just had only diplopia. With all the tests, he had diplopia. So we could not do many of the tests. Okay. So what we did at this visit is that we just tried some Fresnel prisms, because this is really a large ESO deviation, right? So we cannot do anything at this point, and he's having constant diplopia. Okay. And so because he's also undergone MRI scan and there's nothing abnormal neurologically, and we just thought that maybe this is potentially due to any recent viral illness, though patient could not recall anything as such. Okay, so if you go and read the details of this case, so we just said, okay, let's patch one eye for now and wait for 3 months. And we were constantly closely following up this patient, and patient came back after 3 months, and this is what was the the finding. Automatically the double vision had come down. This was definitely an abducens nerve, sixth nerve palsy, but the paresis had resolved. Okay, and patient still has uncrossed diplopia, but this large esotropia became esophoria. Okay, and patient had 16 prisms and 10 prisms. So this is what I presented to you in the quiz, asking you for the diagnosis. Okay, and these are the other details. So patient had normal near points of accommodation, and patient's divergence amplitudes are really poor. So patient is not able to diverge at all. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question at this point. Just remember, okay, remember this patient has got 16 prisms at distance and 10 prisms at near. So I'm going to ask you a question at this point. Okay, just ask, I know that for some of you, this is like, I'm giving you a lot of information, but if you can go back and look at this presentation. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to ask you, now that you know that this patient has got a large ESO deviation at distance, what do you think, is the management primary treatment option? Okay. So this patient has got a diagnosis of divergence insufficiency. That's what we discussed. And remember this table that I showed you at the very beginning, as the primary treatment option. If you remember that, then you can answer this question. But even otherwise, if you see a patient with 16 prisms of ESO deviation at distance and 10 prisms of ESO at near, or any ESO deviation, patient has uncrossed diplopia, which is the option you will choose? Okay, choose the best option that you think is right for this patient. Okay, and once you do that, then I will just tell you whether we did the same thing. Okay, so we're moving towards the end of the presentation for today, and good, I'm getting a lot of people to answer now. Okay, that's good. So our time is up now, and let's see how many of you want to do what. Okay, so majority of you want to do relieving prisms. Some of you want to do vision therapy. Some of you want to give plus lenses. Okay, now remember this, whenever patient is having diplopia, okay, your first management should be to handle the diplopia, because you can't do vision therapy when the patient is seeing double. Okay, when he or she is seeing double all the time, you can't do vision therapy, right? So it's important to handle the diplopia first, and that's what we did. Okay, so what we did is this. Look at this. We first gave prisms, okay, and then we started vision therapy. Okay, so we first gave prisms. I'll tell you how to give prisms. I'll just so this is what we did now. So remember, this is the table that you have to always remember. So in divergence insufficiency, the first treatment option is always prisms. Okay, so for every condition, when you know the condition, then you will know what to do first. Okay, so how do we do prisms? As I told you, please go back and see the topic on prism prescription that I just did last week, which will be available in YouTube shortly, I guess, where we've spoken about different aspects of prism prescription. Especially for exo deviation. So today I'm going to talk a little about some basic aspects of how to prescribe prisms for ESO deviation. So this is what we are talking about, right? Divergence insufficiency. There are many rules. Okay, don't worry. I will just simplify this for you. There are two methods basically to prescribe prisms. The first is called a dissociated method. Okay, what does this mean is, especially whenever you see an ESO deviation, you just don't know what to do, just prescribe 1/3 of the deviation. Okay, so this patient has got 16 prisms. 16 by 3 will be 5.3 something. Okay, so 5.3 prisms, I rounded it up to 5 prisms. So just start with 1/3 of the deviation, and that could be a good starting point for prisms. This is one option. The second option is called residual Vergen's demand. This is a very important thing to know. Okay, so as you see here, this residual Vergen's demand was given by Caleroso. What does this tell you? Look at this. Any, for whatever deviation you have to choose. So any ESO deviation in the range of 6 to 20 prisms, you always have to leave 4 to 6 prisms of the deviation uncorrected. Okay, which means don't correct for about 6 prisms, because the eye has the divergence capability to work for that. Okay, for that amount. Okay, so you don't correct fully, don't give full prescription. Okay, and so leave this much uncorrected. So suppose in this patient he has 16 prisms, so if you leave 6 prisms uncorrected, then you can, the maximum that you can give is 10 prisms. Okay, so this is how you decide. Okay, you can choose your rule of 1/3, or you can choose the residual Vergen's demand. There are many criteria, but I just want you to take these two criteria in mind today. And so what we did for this patient is that we did use the use the residual Vergen's demand criteria, and then we split prisms in between the eyes. So with the prisms in place, we trained the patient. And go and read this paper. We have about how to give vision therapy. So same way, 10 sessions of in-office vision therapy was given, and what was given at every step of vision therapy is written here, and what are the goals of vision therapy. So this paper will explain to you how to provide vision therapy in case of a divergence insufficiency patient like this. Okay, so this is what I want to leave you. This is the message that I want to leave you with. That is, you should always know that how do I really handle sequential manner. Like, I don't do everything at the same time. Okay, so do one by one. The first thing is always prescribing the best refractive correction, the appropriate refractive correction. That is the first step. After you prescribe the patient with the appropriate refractive correction in binocular vision, then look at the table that we showed to you, and then see, okay, depending upon the diagnosis, what should I do first, what should I do next. Okay, and this is a paper that's coming up, that's in press, which talks about post COVID-19, how do we handle optometry practices and optical practices? Because I think one of you asked, how do I manage my retail shop, right? So in this paper, we have given some specific guidelines about how to handle binocular vision and vision therapy, especially in the post COVID-19. So look at, just keep following up the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology. Like, this is going to come up, I think, in the August issue. Okay. So this is one editorial that you can look at to know how do I handle these patients. But otherwise, I really wish you all that they have great times practicing binocular vision. And my sincere acknowledgements to Nepal Optometry Association, Mr. Kapil and team, for organizing this wonderful webinar. And this is the beautiful team that we've got at Shankar Nethralaya, a new addition. So because she's not in the group picture, we put her like separately there. But this is the beautiful team that I've got. And so I'm going to run the last poll for today before I take any questions. So you're going to go back to that same screen that we were just seeing. And what you're going to type is one learning from today. So if you're going to take home, something from today, okay. Oh my, no, I don't want any leaderboard. Okay, anyways, so if you're going to take home something from today, what is that one learning? Okay, so far we discussed about convergence insufficiency, divergence insufficiency. Just type in one learning from today. Okay, so with that, I'm going to look at the chat box to see what kind of questions you've got. So that I can take up those questions, because when you share this learning, what is that you're going to go back and implement in your practice, or what is the one message that you got from listening in the last 1 hour, whatever it is. Okay, just share it. Feel free to share that learning, and if you want to hear more about some topic, if you want more information, some webinar, specific topics for webinar, type that also. Okay, just shortly, just in a word or two, just type whatever you feel that you want to convey. Just type it, and I'll be happy to take a look at that. So we just have a couple of seconds to go, and I'm just going to see like what you've just answered. Okay, so you want to know way to approach. There's no correct answer as such, but then I'm going to look at this. Okay, convergence insufficiency, when to give prisms, how to prescribe for ESO, Sheard's criteria. Very good. Thank you. So I'm going to, okay. So what I'm going to do is get back to my presentation and just finish with one last thing, which is, I know that if you want to stay connected with me, you can do this through Insta or LinkedIn. And if you want to connect with me beyond binocular vision, then I have a channel where I speak a lot of philosophical stuff also. And if you want to share any feedback, this is my email ID for you to share feedback. Okay. And basically what I want all of you to think is this, like, now that some of you might get stuck, okay, situations have changed, how am I going to practice optometry? But this is what I have to say, not me, but many people who've succeeded have told this: every challenge has a hidden opportunity and every obstacle has a hidden door. It's just for us to really see what is lying behind these challenges. Okay. And that's all I have to say. And I am now leaving this to Mr. Kapil and team for some questions. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rizwana, for such an informative and interactive session. Well, now it's time for the discussion session to begin. Are you ready to take the questions, Doctor?
Yes, please.
Okay, I will be reading out the questions for you. Let me check out the questions that our audience might have raised.
Okay.
We have a first question, and the question goes as, should all the children coming with headache should be evaluated for binocular vision testing?
Okay, that's a great question, actually speaking. Of course, yes, because headache is one of the common complaint in binocular vision. So of course, for headache, I think we know hundreds of reasons are there. So there are specific questions that you need to ask. So when a child comes and tells you headache, then you need to ask relevant questions. Is the headache associated with constant near work or reading, or after playing games for longer hours, after the gadget use? So any kind of a headache that is triggered by using the eyes and excessive near visual demands, yes, definitely. But sometimes it's very difficult for children to verbalize, okay, to explain to you what they feel. But nonetheless, at least as I told you, do the basic tests. Okay, so do the basic tests and see if they have some binocular vision issues, because it's very important. As I told you, the prevalence of BV issues are very high in children. So definitely I would recommend getting the BV evaluated. Yes.
Okay, we have another question, and the question goes as, if a children of 10 years old have axophoria of 10 prism diopter for near and orthophoria for distance, what will be your treatment modality?
Okay, 10 prism exophoria at near and at distance.
Yeah, ma'am.
You said, okay, very, very similar to the first case that we discussed. Okay. So the patient was having 8 exophoria at near and orthophoria at distance. So definitely you should do vision therapy for this child. So look at the convergence insufficiency treatment trial protocol about the phases for vision therapy, and you can follow vision therapy, and the success rates, almost 75% of the study population had complete success. Okay, like they recovered from convergence insufficiency. So definitely go look at that study, the CITT, the convergence insufficiency treatment trial, and you will know what exactly to do.
Okay, ma'am. We have our another question, and the question goes as, can we have diplopia in phoria cases, as was in our second case of egophoria of 16 Bezout prism?
Very good question, Mr. Ajit. Basically, yes, because see, this is not EXO, right? ESO deviation, basically any amount of ESO deviation, any small amount of ESO deviation also can result in, diplopia. That is the whole thing, because our divergence amplitudes are not really very, high. Convergence amplitudes are very good. Like, you can really converge very well, but physiologically our divergence is restricted. Okay, so you can't handle ESO deviation like you handle EXO deviation. Actually, when it comes to EXO deviation, even with 20 prisms or 25 prisms also, you will see that patient handles the EXO very well by converging. But in ESO, it's not that case. So any small amount of ESO, if the fusion is disrupted, or any kind of an illness, they can land up with double vision. So that is what is very, very tricky about esophoria. And that is why we also recommend that prisms should be the first starting point for you to leave the double and then start vision therapy, especially when the patient has got esophoria at distance. When they've got esophoria at near, it's a separate story altogether. The management is very different. But this is what I'm speaking is very, very specific to distance ESO.
Yeah, ma'am. We have another question, and the question goes as, in which condition do we document blur, break, and recovery, and in which case we use only break and recovery during Borgen's testing?
Okay, thank you, Paul. Actually, that's another good question. So generally, blur, break, and recovery is what you should document when you are measuring your smooth versions or step versions. Okay, because see, when you, I'm not getting into the detail of, what aspects of versions are getting tested, but when you use your prism bar, what really, happens is that when you just increase the prisms, the patient will first report blur. Okay, and then they will start to report break, and then you reduce the amount of prisms and they will notice recovery. But sometimes patients may not report blur at all. So there are two situations. First is, of course, when you are doing a distance divergence amplitude testing. Okay, because in distance, as I told, your accommodation is relaxed, and so when you're doing your distance divergence testing, patients don't report blur. The second thing is, sometimes, if there are any like in step vergence, especially when you're using prism bars, okay, you are not going like, in one prism diopters. Okay, so somebody asked about smooth and step vergence, right? So in smooth vergence, you are going in increments of say one prism or half a prism diopters. Okay, which you can do with Synaptor 4, or you can even use in Phoropter, or what you have, these Riley prisms, which can go in one prism diopters. That's called smooth vergence. You are smoothly increasing the vergence. Okay, but when you are doing your step vergence, you are jumping. Okay, so you are just jumping from say 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 15. So in that case, sometimes patients may not notice blur and they can directly report double vision. So it is quite common for patient to have just blur and recovery also. But it is important to give these instructions to the patient that when I keep increasing the prisms, tell me when you start to see blurred. And then, if patient don't see blurred, then you can ask the patient whether they see double. Okay, so that's what is important.
Okay, ma'am. We have another question, and the question goes as, while doing the negative fusional versions, why blur point is absent in your case? Can you explain the reason behind it?
Yeah, so that's what I told you, right? So when you're doing your distance divergence, patient do not report blur because your accommodation is already relaxed. And so they do, if they report blur, then which means you have to go back and check whether they have any uncorrected refractive error, because they have not been able to relax their accommodation completely. And that is why they've started to report blur during a distance negative fusional vergence testing, because blur is not expected when you do a distance NFV testing if the patient has adequately relaxed the accommodation. Okay, so that's what is the answer. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. We have another question. Why there is difference between expected values of smooth versions testing and step versions testing in same age group?
Okay, so it's not very different model. Actually, you can look at Morgan's normative values. So as I told you, just refer to Mitchell Scheinman's Clinical Management of Binocular Vision textbook. So her question is why there is difference between. So that is the reason okay, so I didn't get your question correctly, sorry. So why there is difference is mainly because of the way we are testing the versions in itself. So in smooth versions, you are going in in the incremental steps that you are making is very, very smooth, whereas in step you are jumping, okay, not jumping in the sense you are increasing in larger increments, and that is the reason why there is always a difference in the expected values. Okay.
Okay, ma'am, we have another question, and the question is, should we do synaptophore testing in regular BB workup?
Yeah, if you have, see, there are two ways to, so many people disregard synaptophore as an obsolete instrument, okay. I don't see that there is any reason to disregard synaptophore. If you know how to use it, it's such a valuable tool both for diagnosis as well as for management. Just that, you know, you've got more sophisticated tools now. We prefer those tools. Just remember this, in synaptophore, what you are doing is it's a very, very closed setup. Okay, so patient has to look through these binoculars when they are looking at the synaptophore. Okay, so sometimes you are not really able to see the eyes. This is not free space testing, and that is the reason why we prefer testing in the free space, where the examiner is able to see the patient's eye and the response of that eye to your versions testing basically. And that's the reason why we prefer to do free space testing in children when they do not or when we feel that, you know, their responses may not be accurate enough. That is the only reason why I would look at synaptophore as not a good option. But the use of synaptophore is definitely very, very important in certain conditions, especially like treating anomalous correspondence in strabismus, treating your divergence excess, intermittent exotropia of a distance, okay, where the distance exo is really having poor control. So such cases, synaptophore has got great value. But in the absence, if you do not have any say computer based orthoptics, I would highly recommend that you use these some of the modern tools, because it eases out the work for you. It also, you know, helps the patient to stay compliant with your treatment. But if you do not have these tools, definitely synaptophore is a great tool that you can use. Okay.
Okay, ma'am, we have another question. As you explained, in the case of divergence insufficiency, what will be the success percent if we start vision therapy without prescribing prisms?
Okay, that's a really great question, I should say, and many of my colleagues also would ask me this question. See, when patient is having diplopia, the success rate is very, very less, literally, because patient is going to struggle doing the therapy. So there is no point in putting the patient under so much struggle. And if you really see the improvements in this patient, okay, this patient had like great improvements. So you can always take the help of prisms, do vision therapy, then remove these prisms. The whole idea is this. The whole idea is not to make the patient suffer. So if you do vision therapy, the patient first of all cannot really does not have adequate divergence amplitudes to really keep the target single. There's no point. Then you have to first put prisms, help the patient diverge first, and then, you know, start training. And when the patient has developed certain amount of divergence amplitudes, then slowly reduce the prisms and then see how the patient can cope up with the therapy. Okay, that's so always do some combined management strategies in some of these cases. That really works.
Okay, ma'am, we have another question. If a patient is having 0.25 diopter of cylindrical power and is complaining of headache or eye ache, then should we have to prescribe this power?
Okay, that's another great question, because many times we see patients coming with these kind of prescriptions. See, basically, as logic says that there are certain currently, again, based on the evidence, there are certain criteria that says beyond this power, patients are likely to be symptomatic because of the refractive power. Okay, so any cylindrical prescription greater than 0.5 diopters, okay, 0.5 and above, is likely to cause symptoms, especially again looking at the astigmatism, oblique astigmatism, okay, and against the rule astigmatism. So these two are more likely to cause symptoms from 0.5 diopter onwards. Okay, so the type of astigmatism is also very important. But think about with the rule astigmatism, 0.25 diopter is nothing. I mean, it's not neither in terms of the refractive blur that it is going to cause, or even in terms of this power affecting the accommodation or the version system. It's very insignificant. So I wouldn't really think that 0.25 diopter causes some trouble in general. Okay, in general, that's what is I would say.
Okay, we have another question. If anyone want to start vision therapy practice, what would be your suggestion? How to go a way ahead?
Thanks for asking that question, Hiranath, because I mean, if any of you take this message from this talk today, then definitely the objective of the session is done. So if you want to start vision therapy, as I told you, simple tools. Okay, you don't need to have all the sophisticated setup. Okay, so there are simple tools like home-based vision therapy cards. Okay, your CAT cards or your eccentric circle, lifesaver cards, Brock string. Okay, so you have these set of tools that you can just either design yourself or buy it. Okay, and then start vision therapy. Okay, start vision therapy somewhere. If you don't have infrastructure in your clinic, start even home vision therapy. So the first step, of course, is to do binocular vision testing on your patients who have asthenopic symptoms, be able to diagnose, and then start your home vision therapy. And then when you start to see these patients coming back with improvements and you feel really happy about it, then also think about computer-based orthoptics. Okay, because I did mention about computer-based orthoptics and how it has revolutionized the practice of binocular vision. I should say that the whole edition of that the journal, the Vision Development and Rehabilitation Journal, go and read that edition. You will just get brilliant ideas about what you can do, and very affordable computer orthoptic based treatment tools have come in now. Okay, it's not that they're very expensive. So definitely look at how to start small, but start it. That's what I would say. Start it, and there is no reason to really hold your passion from start practicing binocular vision. Okay, so that's what I should say, and hope that you here.
Okay, thus far these are only the questions raised by our attendees. We will be waiting for just few more minutes if anyone is willing to ask. And I thank you all for coming up with your questions and helping to make the session more interactive.
So just 1 second, I want to take one question. I think Himanshu asked a brilliant question, which is, while doing dissociation method for prescribing prisons, should we do 1/3 of the amount of ESO or look the diplopia of? It's a great question, Himanshu. I really like this question. Okay, so when I say 1/3, I said starting point. I said start with 1/3. I did not say give 1/3. And then definitely the minimum amount of prisms that you are prescribing should help the patient to see single. Otherwise, there is no point, right? So whatever is the minimum amount of prisms that helps the patient to see single, you start vision therapy with that amount. So start with 1/3 and slowly increase it and split the prisms equally in front of both the eyes. Okay, so that is very important. And I think there are a couple of other questions. Somebody says, do a session for all BV assessment test with videos. Yes, Rinki, I mean, you can go back and look at those two videos that I recommended, I think, which will be, you can type my name or you will get those basic BV assessment videos, BV assessment test, but with videos. Yes, definitely I will try to do one. And Ashish wants to ask, what is your suggestion for encouraging patients to do vision therapy at their own home? Yes, so one reason is definitely good counseling. Okay, because patient clinician interaction is very important in this process. Okay, so just talking to the patient and counseling the patient about the importance of doing vision therapy, that itself will help the patient. The second thing is the moment they start to do and then see the improvement, then they will automatically do it. The next thing is definitely, I will tell you, try computer-based orthoptics, because it's not that I'm just promoting something or even I had my own queries about computer-based orthoptics. But the reason why I'm telling you is twofold. Number one, you are able to monitor this patient from wherever you are, because when I started this practice, and so I started using a tool that we got from the US. Okay, you must have known about the HTS. And then so we would type in comments to the patient, you're doing very well. And I can't tell you how much patient felt so happy, so happy to see the kind of response from the clinician. And then I will say, you have improved so well, keep it up, do it. And so those kind of interactions really help the patient. The second reason why I'm telling you at this point, especially the post COVID-19 situation, is this has, I'm not, of course, this is not going to continue forever, but it's going to restrict the patient travel to the clinic at least for the next 1 year. Okay, for the next over the 1 year, there are going to be issues for the patients to come to the clinic and do the therapy. So in this situation, definitely look at computer-based orthoptics as a ways to as a means to introduce vision therapy. And encouraging patients, definitely keep a close follow-up. Even if you prescribe CAD card or pencil push-ups, whatever it is, at least once a while. Okay, that's how we started to build up our practice. We would call up the patient after 1 week and 2 weeks and just ask the patient, how are you doing? Are you able to do you have difficulties? So this interaction is going to definitely encourage the patient. Okay.
Yeah, we have another question. Ma'am, can you please explain about the various computer-based therapy for amblyopia treatment?
Okay, thanks, Mr. Krishna, for that question. So we did write a paper recently for the Vision Development and Rehab Journal, and I got an opportunity to look at the various available computer orthoptic programs, for us, okay, within for Asia as such. And so the current affordable tools, some of the affordable tools are, one, we have our own tool which we call the Train Your Eyes tool, and which has software for diagnosis and treating Virgin's problems. And I told you about the Binoc software. So Binoc software is definitely a telehealth vision therapy tool. Okay, it has got all the tools built in that can help you to diagnose remotely and treat the patient remotely, and also has got treatment tools for both amblyopia and binocular vision issues. So definitely these are the current options that are available. There are a few other indigenous tools which I do not have experience with, which I have not tried, which I've not tried. There are a couple of more, I guess, but I did look at all the other options. Like there are Antio, Neurovision, Vision Science Labs, the HTS program, which we have used for almost 10 years. But looking at all these options, the current tools that are more affordable, I should say, for the practitioners, Binocs definitely is something that I would highly recommend.
Yeah, we have another question, ma'am. What would be the best initiation that can be done to develop vision therapy practice in Nepal?
Okay, so that's a really good question, Asad. So of course, start practicing vision therapy. That's what I would say, because based on I think I did visit Nepal, like it's going to be in August 2018. Oh my God. So that's going to be now 2 years. So when I visited Nepal, I visited a couple of hospitals, and I did see one of the institution had a full-fledged vision therapy service. Okay. They've got the vision therapy software. So first I would say that you've got great potentials, like very much similar to our own. There's no difference between the kind of patients that we see here in Chennai or in Nepal. Like the problem of binocular vision is there. First, the problem is there. Okay, I showed you papers from Nepal, right? Look at the percentage of binocular vision problems. It's very similar. So you have the demand. So it's important to understand that you've got the demand. Number two is that good academic foundation, which is all the undergraduate students must definitely be exposed to a very strong foundation of how to do a binocular vision assessment, how to provide basic vision therapy. These two are really important. And primary eye care, like whenever you do refractive correction, be it in the optical shop, be it in a very small hospital, or be it in a tertiary care, along with your primary eye care, start doing small tests like NPCs and NPA, and look at, if you start doing that, then you will know the prevalence of binocular vision problems. So start practicing binocular vision, and then definitely I think starting vision therapy is no big deal at all. You just have to kind of get the person who will help you with supplying these basic vision therapy stuff, and then you start it. That's all. It's not a great investment. Also, the beauty is that you don't need lakhs of rupees to start vision therapy. With a few thousands, you can really start vision therapy that can be very satisfying from a clinical perspective also, and from a practice perspective also. It's very gratifying. So definitely you should consider starting binocular vision and vision therapy.
Okay, ma'am, we can see another question. What is the management and causes of convergence spasm?
Okay, so you are opening up a big Pandora box, another big box. So convergence spasm is again a very, very of course a different problem altogether. So it's got different presentations. Okay, so we've got what we call as the spasm of near reflex. Here you've got an accommodative spasm associated with the esotropia, and then you also call it accommodate spasm. So but what is primarily important is to understand the reason. Okay, so what really has caused the spasm, and then the next common steps are to look at doing a proper cycloplegic refraction, look at if there is any overcorrected myopia or things like that. And then after cycloplegic refraction, what is the status of accommodation and convergence, and then to think about the treatment. Okay, so basically some of these patients who has the spasm of near reflex will need long-term cycloplegics. So we've also published a case report about how we've managed one such patient, but there are more evidences coming up when it comes to the clinical presentation. Okay, but the current standard management for convergence and accommodation spasm is basically cycloplegic eye drops to relieve the accommodation and the convergence spasm, and then look at vision therapy. Okay, and then start vision therapy when the accommodative spasm goes off. Now, some patients may have persistent spasms. Despite treating, they might have persistent spasms, but definitely all these patients need neurological investigations from an ethical standpoint, just to make sure that there is nothing neurologically abnormal that has caused these kind of issues, and then follow them up. Yeah.
Ma'am, I guess I'm a little bit worried about you. You are continuously taking the question since 1.5 hours. So are you comfortable to take more question?
I'm okay, because I'm here to just help you guys. So if I can help you, I'm glad.
Okay, so okay, proceed. You can proceed. So
okay, we have another question. What is the age cutoff in those therapies?
Age cutoff, I mean, there is no age cutoff for vision therapy as such. Like, see, if you're dealing with children, basically the child has to understand the instructions that you give for vision therapy. That's all. So we would start, say, as young as 5 years of age, when they're able to understand your instructions and start exhibiting voluntary convergence when you're teaching these Brock string and things like that. So especially think about amblyopia. When you're starting your patching therapy and you want to give any near vision based activities, you don't look at age. You have to start the treatment, right? So it's important that there is no as young as 5 years of age, when it comes to active vision therapy like convergence exercises or whatever, you can definitely start if the patient is able to comprehend your instructions. And when it comes to the upper limit, there's no scientific evidence as such, but based on the clinical evidence I'm speaking, we've handled as old as 70-year-old and 72-year-old patients. The whole point is the patient if the patient is very keen to improve their binocular vision status. Okay, after you explain, you counsel them about vision therapy options, and you make sure, okay, that they would benefit from vision therapy. So compared to prisms versus vision therapy, if you think vision therapy is going to help them, considering their visual demands, because some of these patients wanted to read continuously for hours without any eye strain, and they took vision therapy and they are very happy. So it's completely up to the patient. But think about a patient who has many systemic comorbidities. Okay, they have diabetes and hypertension and issues like that, and then they don't they don't want to come and sit and take the vision therapy. Then definitely think about prisms, because in adult population, especially in presbyopes, prisms in convergence insufficiency, at least I'm talking about prisms, definitely have very good effectiveness in relieving the symptoms. Okay, so it is completely up to the patient and the motivation that they've got.
Okay, ma'am, we have again another question. Is there any easy indication to catch variant myopia?
Okay, so thanks for that question. It's a very different topic altogether. So basically, first the audience here, I don't know if they know what is variant myopia. So variant myopia is a very different condition altogether, where you see a discrepancy between your retinoscopy value and patient's acceptance. Okay, so you get a very less amount of myopia when you do your retinoscope, but when you do the acceptance, patient accepts more myopia. Okay, so we did a study on this and we published this in the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology. You can go and take a look at the step-by-step protocol that we followed in the particular study. But whenever you see this discrepancy, of course, cycloplegic refraction is the first step. And look at key signs of accommodative spasm, because you think that this is accommodative spasm, right? Because patient is accepting more minus. But if it is not acute onset, like they've not got this problem all of a sudden, there is no ESO deviation, the retinoscopy reflex is not varying, then after you rule out accommodative spasm, look at ocular biometry parameters, like the axial length of the patient. Does it correlate with the subjective acceptance that you are doing? So just go refer to this paper and you will get more information. But one way to catch up is just to look at these key features of accommodative spasm, which are very much absent in variant myopia. Yeah.
Yeah, we have another question, which is again about the age cutoff, but is basically asking for amblyopia, which you have already answered. Do you want to answer it one more time regarding amblyopia, ma'am?
Yeah, so definitely, based on there are more evidences coming up, but as I guess the recent evidence that we've got for dichoptic based, I guess it's 7 years, the minimum, because that's the age when some of these patients get started to treating amblyopia. So as long as I told you, if the patient is able to handle, just give a trial. Like, don't ignore that this is patient looks small. As you know, the current generation, even at 1 year and 2 years, they are using mobile phones, right? So don't underestimate the ability of a kid to handle devices or computers. So just give a try and see whether they're able to interpret. But based on evidence, like based on some of the dichoptic studies, the minimum age that these studies have handled is 7. So you can definitely look at from 7 years onwards.
Okay, ma'am. We have again another question by Hira sir. Many of the time it's difficult to make patient party understand regarding the importance of vision therapy. What would you recommend for this?
I know, like, that's how patients are. Of course, they have all rights to ask you the question. So one way is to talk about a very scientific standpoint. So this is how we explain to the patient. So we tell the patient, say, this is, so you've got an issue with the eye muscle coordination. So, your ability to converge, like bring the eyes together, is poor. And now there are, one option is to really do eye exercises like vision therapy. And so these exercises are proven scientifically to improve the eye muscle coordination, as well as the symptoms that you've got. Okay, so within as I told you, 12 to 24 weeks, right? So that is, if you convert to months, roughly about, say, 5 months, 5 to 6 months maximum, you will be able to come out of this problem completely. And so this is one way of telling. And if you don't treat it, suppose if you have more demands, especially patients who come to us or they have their exams right around the corner, or they've got these computer jobs. All of us now use computers in our jobs. So tell them that most of the time, all our work is very limited to a closer visual environment. So it's very important for us to keep our eyes and the eye muscle coordination healthy. Otherwise, sometimes you might start to see double, and the problem might get worsened. We don't know, but it's important to do this simple treatment that can really bring you great improvement within a short period of time. So why don't you just give a try? Why don't you give a try for a week? When some patients are very hesitant, I would just tell them, just do it for 5 days, do it for 10 days, I would say. And no patient has kind of felt it didn't work as such. Okay, so after 10 days, they really start, after 5 hours, 5 sessions of treatment, they start to see the improvement. So it's just about speaking to the patient and just convincing them.
I guess we have answered almost all the questions till now. Considering the time limits, here I announce the closure of discussion session. Now we are to the end of today's webinar. I would again like to express my immense gratitude towards our presenter, Dr. Rizwana, for blessing us with such a wonderful session, and as well to the attendees for their endurance. Also, I would like to thank all the direct and indirect helping hands for this iTalks program. I request you all to subscribe our YouTube channel to stay updated to our programs even in the upcoming days. Before wrap up, I request our today's presenter, Dr. Rizwana, to share her few words to our program.
First, felt thanks to the Nepal Optometry Association for putting up such a nice program, because it's not just me talking here. I'm following up. Like, you are very, very active, you guys. You've really made use of this time very, I should say, even today you had a great speaker speaking to you in the morning, Dr. Prem Nandini. So I just see the way that you guys are very, very keen and curious to improve the quality of optometry in Nepal. So my heartfelt appreciation and gratitude to the entire team, because what you guys are doing is amazing. And what really impressed me, I should say, is that at this time, like, it's 9:30, 9:20 in India, and you guys are 9:45, and even at this time there are still 20 people sitting and watching this, okay, and asking questions, especially in binocular vision. I can't believe this, basically. So so this is one of the most interactive session I've had, especially given the time that we are discussing. Looking at the interest of the audience, I seriously see that there is a great potential for you guys to really take up binocular vision and vision therapy to the next level in Nepal, and all my support is there with you. So wishing you guys all the best and keep doing the good work. And thanks to everyone who are present, who were present and who are present with us even until now. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Still, we have a little bit more question there, but I'll definitely share you on the on Gmail. So, and we'll be revert to the attendees after all, because we have already invested a lot of time, and I think you might be tired after the 2 hours. I guess it's about like 1 and 40 minutes of session. So thank you so much, ma'am. It's so honor, and we feel honor, and we are so much happy for your presence on our platform.
Thank you, Kapil, Solu, and everybody is present here. Thank you very much.